In that case, we're going to go ahead and open the Plan Commission here in the city of Middleton. Today is October 10th, and I'm doing the call to order. Can we start with a roll call?
Adams.
Here.
Bruce.
Here.
Erdman Hermans.
Here.
Hanairo.
Here.
Summers.
Here.
And Mayor Kuhn is present. Commissioner Harp is absent and excused.
Great, thank you so much. Moving on to the minutes, do we have any changes or updates to it?
I had one, and it could just be my recollection, but on page 11 of the packet, above item number 7, off-street parking standards, it says by consensus, commissioners agreed to add or eliminated to subsection 7. But if you read subsection 7, I think we also agreed to take out the reduction of up to 50%. Otherwise, it reads a reduction, allowing a reduction of up to 50% or eliminated, and that doesn't make sense. So my recollection was we talked about taking out the 50% reference and just saying allowing a reduction or allowing parking to be reduced or eliminated. However it's phrased, we'll see it when we get into that part of the agenda.
And with that change, is there any other changes? Hearing none, I accept the minutes with that change. Or future change of the minutes of September 26th. And moving on to agenda items, the specific implementation plan modification for design review exterior affinity sculpture at High Site headquarters, 3252 Pleasant View Road. Staff, do you want to have
Yes, this is a beautiful new sculpture that's being proposed at the High Site campus at the southwest corner of Airport Road and Pleasant View Road. And this is before you for design review. The city's Public Arts Committee reviewed the proposal. They were very supportive of the design and they recommended approval. I also ran this by our Public Works Department. They look for things like proximity to right-of-way, and this is well outside of the right-of-way area. Could the new installation be a hazard to drivers? In this case, they said no, it's well outside of the street corridor. And then also looking for utilities, and this doesn't interfere with any public utilities. So with that, our staff recommends approval as a minor SIP modification.
Do I have a motion?
Bruce moves approval.
Do I have a second?
Summers will second.
Any discussion?
I just want to say how excited I am to see some more art going up in the city, especially as a former arts committee member. This is wonderful.
Sounds great. All those in favor of approving the SIP with modification, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. It's a beautiful design. Thank you for bringing that forward. Next is the specific implementation plan modification for monument sign, Autumn Ridge, 3809 to 3815 Tribeca Drive. Do I have a motion?
Bruce makes a motion to move for approval.
Do I have a second?
Adams will second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the SIP modification for monument sign, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to certified survey map, lot 1 of Middleton Valley Apartments at Red Tail Ridge. Can I have a little staff background, please?
Yes, so this goes along with the next agenda item as well. It's for the Middleton Valley Apartments. They have 2 lots, and so they will be having a second CSM, which they'll be submitting tomorrow to us. But this is for buildings 3 and 4, if you looked over the SIP in the next agenda. And so it's just to be able to subdivide the lots and build the two buildings separately on separate lots.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
Bruce will move approval.
Do I have a second?
Adams will second.
Any discussion?
Yes, just to clarify, it's with contingent upon satisfaction of engineering comments. If we could add that, yeah.
Thank you. And I also wanted to ask if there's going to be some cross-access easements or cross-lot easements for access, parking, utilities, stormwater, and so forth that should be reflected on the CSM.
Is that for later in the plan, or is that something that can be answered today?
Yeah, so usually with CSMs, we only really want to see the public easements. So if it's with, for stormwater, if it's two separate buildings, the stormwater needs to be separated onto, each building has its own stormwater on each side of the lot line. And then with public utilities, we want those marked on here. And so I think, there's some comments like showing the 10-foot utility easement that we want added to the plat, but otherwise for like pedestrian access or I believe the parking will be separated across the two lots as well. So we don't need to show anything like that.
Okay.
But it's good to keep in mind for
Right.
later. So I appreciate that comment. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the certified survey map, Lot 1 of Middleton Valley Apartments at Red Tail Ridge, of approving this contingent upon satisfaction of engineering comments, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the specific implementation plan for Middleton Valley Apartments at Red Tail Ridge. Do I have a motion?
This is an IRO. I'll move approval of the specific implementation plan for Middleton Valley Apartments at Red Tail Ridge contingent, or with the 7 contingencies identified in the staff memo.
Summers will second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I just wanted to note, there are several things in the contingencies that I wanted to note. So number 7, Public Works wanted a clarification that the access point would be for pedestrians specifically. There's a vehicle restriction access along Bellefontaine at that area. So they wanted to specify that's just for pedestrians and bicycles. And then for contingency number 5, I believe the owners or the developers have some issues with, the zoning because it doesn't necessarily fit into our MRH, dimensional standards. And then it would become kind of like a
Non-conforming.
non-conforming structure, which could, have issues with their with acquisition of the property. So if possible, we can hold off on, assigning it that. It's just, a little bit easier for us when we do adopt the zoning to have it as MRH, but that's not necessary, for the approval of the apartments.
Reasonable. All right.
Could we have the applicant just let us know what features of the zoning are problematic? This is just for our benefit as much as anything else.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Kevin Burrow with Canothian Bruce Architects. So in reviewing the future zoning changes, the MRH has some setback requirements that for one of the buildings we will not be in conformance with. We have assumed a 10-foot setback in an area that will likely be deemed a 20-foot setback in the future. So the placement of the building is actually, it's about 13.5 feet away from the property line. But if it were to be classified as requiring a 20-foot setback in the area, the building would exist in non-conformance at that point.
Let's see where you're pointing this out at.
Let me pull up the overall site plan here.
I believe it's this building one along High Road.
That is correct.
Sorry.
Assuming High Road would be classified as a front yard or a street frontage would still either require a 20-foot setback.
Right.
But as you can see, High Road is located a great distance away. Future right of way has been allocated, but we are sitting at about 13 and a half feet away.
Is that taking into account any improvements with the bike path? Is there a bike path right away there?
There's a bike path along the south over here along Bellefontaine. I don't believe I think it's just a regular sidewalk along High Road.
I thought that's supposed to be a path, a multi-purpose path.
Yes, along Bellefontaine Boulevard is the multi-purpose path, I believe. Marketing.
Alder Nairo, you're talking about a path continuing north on High Road.
Mhm.
I'd have to look at our bicycle pedestrian plan, but I think that would be appropriate. I don't remember if that's shown on the plan or not. I didn't review this one specifically. Wait, let me check that.
Kevin, what would be the impact if you were to increase that setback to the 20 feet to the site plan? It looks like everything could be shifted.
We're getting inched on the upper portion where the parking lot is right, the wetland areas,
Yeah.
Would that just be elimination of a few parking stalls then?
potentially. Adam, was there any concerns grading wise?
What's the parking ratio?
We're at 1.5.
Yeah. It's about 1.556 per building.
Do you have any preferences?
Well, I mean, I would prefer that if we're going to have it zoned and we want it to be zoned the high density multifamily, that we just make it have it comply, and it looks doable to me. Unless the applicant sees a real significant issue, I just assume we have that setback increased to the 20 feet. We don't know what's going to happen with High Road in the future.
Mhm. I would support that too. I'm looking at the other I thought, okay, we could just change it to say assigning the applicable multifamily zoning classification, but they're all 20 feet setbacks from the street.
My specific concern with it is that there might be a need in the future for a bike path for additional access that's not reliant on cars. That's a goal that we have overarching, and that is like a main thoroughfare. And if the building was too close, that wouldn't be possible in the future. So thinking about the future and increasing density and further growth, it seems like a poor idea right now to have a limited setback there and not be able to continue that path on High Road when necessary.
Yeah, we'd be receptive to confirming that we can make that happen.
And if we moved forward tonight, we could just go along with these contingencies and you could work through the parking at a later time. Like, I'm comfortable with that.
Yep.
Is that fair?
I think so.
Okay,
Could I just answer Alder Nairo's question?
please do.
So the bicycle network plan and the comprehensive plan does not indicate bike paths along this, but that is something I think that we would want to look at changing when we prepare our new bicycle plan or active transportation plan.
Right.
We obviously have seen a great interest locally in having paths alongside roadways. So, and this map is 2 years old. So I guess I appreciate the sentiment that given, especially since there's a path along High Road already, although that was meant to be a Band-Aid because there isn't a full urban cross section there. But people do seem to like bike paths, at least as an option over bike lanes. So But I also like the idea that Commissioner Bruce mentioned about moving the building to the east. And if it means losing a few parking spaces with the ratio that was indicated, I don't see that as problematic. And it sure would be nice to have our new zoning code with the 20-foot setback, which applies, by the way, in the medium and high density districts, would be 20 feet. So either way, it would be a 20, either way, it would be the same distance. There wouldn't be a reduction. So I think that would be what I would recommend.
And I would just add, I know the Public Works Committee, I can't find it right now, but I know the Public Works Committee rejected the Red Tail Ridge developer's request to not put in any sidewalk or path along High Road during this first phase. We rejected that and actually said we need to have the city figure out a way to extend the temporary path that's there to connect all the way to where Red Tail Ridge will finish its part of the path. So that's something that came out of Public Works, and I will find it at a later date. But I do think, Alder Bruce, if you would like to make a substitute motion. Or are we just keeping the?
To amend the motion.
I think we're keeping it because the zoning classification would be at the
Would be the
time the city
multifamily.
adopts its new zoning map
Okay.
is number H. Is that fair?
I see what you're saying. You just want to be clarified that the site plan will be adjusted to meet
Yes.
the requirements.
Ah,
I can do
very
that.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mayor Kuhn. The civil engineer for the project, Wade Weiss, has his hand raised.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Abby. I just want to chime in here and make sure we don't lose track of the building to the north and the setback along High Road, if we're going to clarify, because that one, as you go to the underground parking on the east side of the building, I believe there is a site constraint there in our inability to get to that 20-foot setback there.
You go up.
This is.
Yeah, if you'll note, the edge of our pavement and access to the underground parking is located right along a utility easement and the drainage way up there. So, you know, I would request on behalf of the developer and the applicant, maybe some more flexibility as part of this motion. We would prefer to have something more consistent with the GDP and stretching that setback to make that accommodation happen there. Just want to be mindful of that.
Yeah, but why can't they access right there?
Abby, can you point out
Yeah.
which word he's talking?
Yeah, right there.
And what's the road to the,
Oh, so it's both buildings.
Yeah, so if I can just further elaborate, if you go to the underground parking, the east side of the drive lane there is actually a retaining wall to hold up the grade so that the swale still functions as it's supposed to. So pushing that retaining wall into that easement is what I'm looking to try to avoid. So you can see how this building is pinched in the current layout.
And that easement is for what, Wade?
That's a public utility easement that wraps the lot.
okay, Abby, can you show me the bottom corner? Because I'm guessing it's 13 feet at the bottom because that's High Road for both buildings. And then on the far side, is that also 13 feet?
Yeah, so it looks like both buildings are about 13 feet from High Road, and High Road is down at the bottom of the screen. And then it's like tilted, you know,
Got it.
so Bellefontaine is typically to the south, but it's shown here. So
That's
this side is the north, this
What
side
is
is the
that?
south.
And is the north going to be a different development, so not on the road? I'm just trying to make sure.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
north is not part of
So
the
we're
city or anything.
Only looking at the High Road side.
I don't remember did the general development plan give us setbacks and establish setbacks? I mean, they do have the right to keep with the GDP.
Yeah, the GDP did not establish setbacks for this lot. It didn't show, I don't think it showed all these lots. That was in the plat. But yeah, it didn't specify specific setbacks.
I would note that the lot on the left, so the northern lot, the front for zoning purposes would actually be High Road. The rear would be at the top, which is the east. So the west, or the north side, excuse me, which is the left side, is a side setback.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure why that one is shown as a 30-foot setback. I guess that would be a question I would have for Wade, or
We showed it as a 20, actually. We had,
is that 20?
yeah, we had 20 on the north and 10 on the west.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So is there a reason, what's the dash line indicate? Is that an
Around the
easement
building,
where it's at the 20 feet? What's the,
setback.
so that's a setback line. Okay. Is there a utility easement in there? Is that why did you want to have 20 feet there? Just to have a little buffer from the property line?
Yeah, to have guarantee we can have more window openings in the building. And then I'm not sure about any utility easements that may need to run through there.
Yeah, because I would treat that as a side setback and the minimum is 8 feet. But obviously, since a lot of units face that way, being 8 feet from a lot line that kind of functions as the rear lot line maybe is a concern. I'm not sure, but if you slid the building to the north, you'd get a little more room on the southeast corner is what I'm getting at. So,
Yeah,
We have 33
And-
feet from the center line, so we're gonna get additional right away.
and the entrance to the garage is 24 feet. That the driveway is about 24 feet wide.
This is the side.
Sorry, I meant to say the width of the drive going to the garage. Is that 24? It looks like it's about 24,
Yeah, I believe
26.
so.
Okay.
if we had to, we could look at narrowing that slightly.
Is it not possible for the garage entrance to be on the south side of the east wing? Yes, near the hand, yes. Similar to how it's oriented on the other building.
No, we need the distance to be able to ramp down a story to enter at the lower level. It'll be too steep if we move it forward.
Because I thought if you could enter there, you can push the building.
Yep.
Is there a plan modification that could be made to take a few feet out of the building? It looks like you're close, but not quite there. Maybe between moving the building slightly to the
Right.
north and
We have about 6 feet plus or minus to make up. So we could study it, try and shift the building up the pager to the east slightly. It'll bring the drive closer to that corner of the building. And if we also look to shift it to the north to gain a little bit of length, perhaps collectively we can make this work and get to exactly 20 feet off of the property line.
Yeah, and I just might add, Kevin, to that if there was, and just to clarify, just so everybody knows, a high road, there was, I know we're talking about a reference to a future zoning code here, but high road, there was a significant right-of-way dedication, right? So, and in the future, it will be rebuilt, but day one here, there will be a lot of space between the building and the pavement edge, or the bike path, or the path that goes up there. So I just suggest maybe there's some flexibility in that language to get as close to 20 as we can, and we'll do our best. But I think overall the setback and the added right-of-way dedication there helps the cause too.
And it seems like the building on the right, building one, we could move easier because it's just the parking, as
Yeah.
Commissioner Bruce was talking about,
Correct.
losing a couple of those. It's more that building two. So if you guys could work to try, if it wasn't a full 20, I would be comfortable being a few feet short. I would try not to.
No,
I
we
would
completely
recommend we
understand.
try to, but can we move forward with this?
I think that's a good approach. Before we close out on this, I also want to talk about, Daphne, you had mentioned in your staff report that there was some concern about fire department and emergency response vehicle access from High Road to the buildings, into the buildings.
Yes, let me pull it up. This was also related to the, just the general access into the building, since they noted, most of the access or the entrances and exits are, from this courtyard area. And so they did not show an entrance, along High Road. And so they show these areas where they call them, I believe, aerial fire, something like that, where the ladder can, go up and they can access it from the street. However, if the fire truck is parked there, and, firefighters are coming out of the truck at, this location or here, there's no way to really access the building from, especially this corner. However, they did provide an additional PowerPoint that could address some of those, where they could add some entrances along High Road in Bellefontaine. So I'm not sure who is addressing it. Maybe Wade is here to
I
address
can
it.
speak to that.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
You want to call? Yes, if you could zoom
Yeah.
in to lot 2 then.
They provided this to me earlier this morning to present here. And so these are potential pedestrian access points. Yeah, go ahead.
Cause a minor rework of the first floor plan to get a public access corridor through the building. But that's something we'd be receptive to, because it would provide our residents an opportunity to access the sidewalk network directly onto High Road.
I think that looks like a good solution.
Is there any other discussion or concerns?
I had a question about, there's a reference to future solar installation. I'm just wondering why not do it right away?
We will certainly design the building to be able to accommodate.
Favorite topic.
And I'm happy to take that question. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's, federal money for solar installation. But, our T.R. McKenzie's trades are not union trades. And the prevailing wage requirements from the federal government for that, it's something like, $50 for just general labor pushing a broom, and that just drives building costs way up. So the thought would be to plan for the future installation when we can do that after, we've got the occupancy, we know exactly, what we're sizing for, and then hopefully, capture some federal, grant money to make it, more economical. So that's the justification.
Okay. And then on page 55, it says both underground and surface parking area will include EV charging areas, as well as plan for additional installation of EV chargers. So I just want to make sure, because then the staff memo on page 47 says it will be EV charger ready. So which is it? Will it have chargers installed right away, or will it be EV ready?
We will, we can put those in right away. It's something that we've planned for and just sort of, wanted to be ready to kind of meet market demand. But obviously there's a huge need for EV, charging. So that's something we can address right away.
Yeah, I definitely would like to see it right away. And I guess, are you going to have any gas appliances in these buildings?
We normally go with an electric range. I believe, I don't know for certain on the furnace units, if those are gas or not. I'm not certain.
Will there be washers and dryers,
There will be washers and dryers.
electric or gas dryers?
Electric generally, yeah.
I was gonna say, I think I hear a theme here. I'm guessing electric.
Electric,
It's good.
you may have heard, we are now a LEED gold certified municipality, and we would love it if your building would help us furnish our sustainability credentials even more. Thanks.
And we love our staff for doing all of that work, and we're very excited about it. So thank you for answering those questions on the front end. Thank you for bringing them up. All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Wade Weiss has his hand raised again.
Hello, Wade. Go on.
I'm sorry, I think it's just still raised from the original. I'll turn it off.
We just thought you were so excited. All right. And
I
then-
am, don't get me wrong, I am.
Okay, great. All those in favor?
Can we restate the motion? so
Oh,
we know?
yes.
Do we need to make any amendments to the motion?
I don't think you do, because we're going with the 7 contingencies in the staff memo.
Well, but we did want to say something about contingency number 5. I don't know how to word it.
Does
but the-
staff have a recommendation on that? I think it's with continued conversation on the building design,
On
contingent on.
the most northern building, providing some flexibility to meet the intent of the zoning, of the MRH zoning.
Sure.
And then also to include the additional pedestrian access points that were shown on your presentation tonight. And then if I could, Andy, will your legal team provide the private cross-access easements that are
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, that's not an issue.
Yeah.
And we have not yet been able to kind of fully review what the that MRH kind of looks like. I know that, we talked a little bit about the potential for non-conforming, and I just want to make sure that doesn't have implications to financing or anything down the road. So that's just an additional kind of bullet point regarding that.
Okay, so we have our motion and our second, but can we?
I was going to reread the one for number 5, if
Thank
that's
you.
okay, if this meets with the intent of the maker of the motion. And the second. So number 5 would read, as you see on the screen, the applicant will support the city assigning the MRH zoning classification or its equivalent at the time the city adopts its new zoning map, with the understanding that staff will work with the developer to adjust the building placement, the placement of the buildings so that they better conform with the new zoning classification.
That's good.
Do we need to discuss number 6?
We can.
Well, I want to commend you guys for including so many bicycle parking installations, more than a 1-to-1 ratio, which I haven't seen on any other plans so far in my term. And I love that it's so high because it's also near the Conservancy and kids bike to school that way. It would be nice if there were more connection to those bike trails rather than just through the parking lot. That this new development were more connected and interconnected to the existing developments in the area, that this neighborhood felt like it were more connected. And right now it does feel a little bit like a couple big blocks of cement next to the road that are kind of just walls. So I think maybe the intent of suggestion number 6 was to create more of an inclusive feeling and connection with the bike path and other developments and the road. It would be nice to see a little bit more, variability in inviting design and texture.
And one of our challenges, I mean, I agree. I bike through this area. I mean, incredible bike network, here in the area. One of our kind of main challenges on the site was that kind of large swale that kind of split the lot north to south and made the interconnectivity between those, lots 2 and 3 very challenging. But I believe, as relates to number 6, was more related to kind of the aesthetic of the building, aesthetics, colors, design, that sort of thing is. And we're definitely open to exploring different treatments, different colors, more variables with that item.
Mm-hmm. And are you including balconies that people can actually spend some time on? Are they designed big enough for people to actually spend time there?
Yeah, I don't know the exact size. I believe it's similar to we've done before. And it's very important, that outdoor, be able to spend time and sit on a patio and enjoy some time. So each unit will have its own dedicated balcony.
Very happy to hear that. I was looking more at the placement of them. Do we have any specific colors that were concerning to people? Well, there they are. What page is that?
This is page 92 of the packet. I guess I would ask staff to explain what their thoughts were.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Sure, yeah. I just thought since there are 4 buildings, they have like the 2 on the southern lot and the 2 on the northern lot are virtually identical, just kind of like flipped around. So the northern lot has more of a blue and orange, and then the southern is more like a brown and darker blue gray. And so they did vary the 2 lots, but I was just wondering if they would be more amenable to, having each building either a different color or just to create more variability in the development. Sorry, my PDF is going a little crazy, so I can't pull up the renderings, but.
Could be the Wi-Fi in here. It's okay. We'll work on that too.
We would be receptive to providing some accents and complementary colors between buildings 1 and 2 and between buildings 3 and 4. But having the lots be cohesive as a design.
I like that. That sounds nice. And we could always talk more about that. So for now, this looks good. Is there any other comments? I liked your thoughts on the bicycles, and I'm glad you brought up on the parking. It's always a delight. Hearing no other comments. All those in favor of the SIP for Middleton Valley Apartments at Red Tail Ridge, noting the 7 contingencies in the staff memo and the additional language.
Yeah, as amended in the discussion, right?
Thank you. As amended in the discussion, especially for number 5 and the bike petty access points and further on, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
May I
Thank you.
ask a
Thank you very
question?
much.
Who seconded Commissioner Bruce's motion?
I thought it was your motion.
It was mine originally, but
And
then Commissioner Bruce.
I didn't know that was a formal motion. I'm sorry. I took that as an amendment, just a friendly amendment, but was there a motion?
I thought that we had a motion and a second. I thought we had a motion and a second,
Oh,
but I can't tell you how it was
my
made.
rules.
I know that was the original motion, and then I thought we were crafting
Yeah, and then we just well, I don't think we made another motion.
that's my
Okay.
point.
Yeah, that's
So
correct.
the original motion was Hanira, seconded by Summers, is what I wrote down.
Okay.
And then, this is, I guess, something I would appreciate a short discussion about this. So I know our new procedure is to make a motion to speak to the motion. So if, when there are amendments made, it's been my understanding over the years, one can accept those as friendly amendments if the maker of the motion, in fact, I think I made that comment, if this is acceptable to the maker of the motion. I had said that at the time.
Right,
So-
but the maker of the motion, I thought was Commissioner.
Well, I had you listed for some reason.
No, I think it was Bruce.
Okay, well, we can.
Well,
Sorry.
I don't know if there was a second.
Summers.
Yeah,
Summers
maybe I
is
just
different.
heard, maybe I didn't hear the voice right. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
All right, just making sure we're crossing the Ts and dotting the Is.
I'm just going that they were going with the 7 contingencies. So that's why I didn't make the amendment
Yeah.
change. But for
But it would be-
future, I will clarify who my first and second is.
Well, and
Second
I'm just, the reason I
discussion.
bring this up is it would be easier not to have multiple motions and amendments just for record keeping purposes. If there's consensus along the way, yeah, that would be easier, would be my recommendation. But if you wish to do it by motion, we'd have to be more formal with the minutes.
Well, under Robert's rules, you should not make a friendly amendment. There's no.
I
such-
understand,
Yeah, so,
but, right.
which
So
is
that's
why I
why,
understood it as Commissioner Bruce was substituting a motion. And it sounds like he did, or he phrased it in such a way that it passes muster.
I'm comfortable having that be a motion if that's what's necessary.
Why don't you go ahead and do that? Just to make sure.
So let the record reflect that I move approval of the SIP with the 7 contingencies listed with an adjustment to item number 5, that the applicant work with staff to meet the MRH zoning classification requirements as close as practical.
And I will second that.
So this is then a substitute motion to the original motion. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you for all of your patience and the robust discussion. Next, draft zoning ordinance, chapter 10, lighting code, chapter 33, and zoning map, providing guidance based on committee feedback and additional staff input. To ask staff to
Yeah, so I
share some.
I will take my cue and the cadence from the committee, from commissioners here, but I thought it would be good to go back to first tidy up the discussion from the last meeting, and that's the sequence that I have in the memo. So the first 12 items are the issues raised by committees that necessitate further guidance. You had asked at the last meeting, you had given us the guidance to allow duplexes, twin houses, and 2 flats as conditional uses. And then we discussed that with the consultant and amongst ourselves as well. And we came up with 3 options because it's problematic to have conditional uses for the approach with going with conditional uses is problematic. So we have option 1, 2, and 3 as outlined in the memo. So without reading through it all, because I assume prepared, I will just give that as my intro and let you discuss it.
Could you scroll through and just refresh my memory as the other options, please?
Yeah, so adding duplexes and 2 flats as conditional uses, I was recommending we not do twin houses. And the reason is because twin houses can be on their own lots, so that they're separately owned. And so that really would add a lot of complexity to the code. So I just assumed that would not be part of it. Option 2 is to add duplexes and 2 flats as permitted uses in all 3 SR districts. And option 3 is to expand the areas on the zoning map where the 2-family, either the flats or duplex zoning districts are applied. And that was something we weren't, as staff we wouldn't recommend that approach. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and the reason that we were not favoring option 3 is because then it would be incumbent on us as staff to determine the areas where it's appropriate for additional 2-family, where most cities have taken an approach, if they're trying to incrementally add density in existing established neighborhoods, is they really want that to be applied citywide so that you're not impacting one neighborhood more than another. So it's like, you're not going to see a wholesale change in any one neighborhood. Instead, you're incrementally increasing housing options throughout the community.
I would say that the Workforce Housing Committee recommended option 1 is my recollection, that these would be conditional uses so that there'd be some more discussion.
That was our recommendation. I think that is there a concern that the conditional use standard is going to be problematic?
Our consultant's reaction to this was, first of all, that we'd have to add some conditional use standards for 2-family uses, such as through design standards, parking, buffering, storage, etc. But Ben noted also that another downside is that then involves more neighborhood input, which can be good and bad. It's a lot of people who have concerns about this would say that's good, but then that builds in a deterrent to anybody wanting to do this, to go through this process. So whereas if it's a permitted use, it would just be, what do you say?
And just to expand on the concern from the consultant, the one that really resonated with me is that, you know, when you notice a public hearing for a conditional use application, as we would through this process, it implies that the city has more control over the approval of it. And so I can think of a recent example where we had an application for rezoning to allow 2 duplexes, and there was a lot of neighborhood input about that. And it may set us up in a position where we have a lot of interested people weighing in, but we have written ourselves into a corner where actually we can't deny the conditional use application because it meets the standards.
So we have a legal challenge, potentially.
Right.
I think I remember that case, and that's really hard.
And that's the underlying, one of the big themes of the ordinance, right? Why we have more zoning districts is because of the change in state law with conditional uses. So we're proposing to create more zoning districts so that we could use rezoning, which where we have more discretion as a city to guide land use decisions, as opposed to relying on conditional uses based on standards that we're then obligated to approve.
So I have a question. Could we go with option 2, but include the standards that we would have them meet had they gone through the conditional use process? Like, can we add conditions?
Yeah, so what I did at the bottom of page, you see it in red on your screen. 2 standards that come to mind right away are that these lots, a single family lot, SRL lot normally has to have 7,200 square feet minimum area per our zoning regulations. And a duplex under TRD zoning requires 10,000 feet. So obviously we should carry that 10,000 feet forward into this. So you would only be able to do that if you had a lot area that was at least 10,000 square feet. There's plenty of those in the city. You know, there's many, many lots that are over 10,000 square feet. But we wouldn't want to see a duplex evolve where the lot is only 7,200 square feet. So that's why I suggested that we put that clarification in there. If there's other standards you'd like us to add, you know, nothing comes to mind at the moment, but if there are other things you'd like us to add, we could do that.
We did look into a couple of other cities, especially cities that had actually gotten accolades for the way that they handled this issue, like Minneapolis and Madison in their revisions to their code. And they did not have the conditional use option. So we were hoping to draw upon standards that they had outlined and propose them here. But the way that this evolved is the standards that we had kind of discussed as a staff and landed on were the minimum lot areas. And then we thought, okay, so if we're showing those as the conditional use standards, then why not make them permitted if they meet the standards? Because we really, as a city, we no longer have the ability to deny a conditional use permit if it meets the standards that are outlined in the ordinance.
Mhm. What about something with parking? That instead of the building having a certain parking ratio, that both units would meet that parking ratio?
I think the way our single family and 2-family zoning classifications are written, it wouldn't be a meaningful. There's plenty of setback to have parking that's all right, to have, I just want to make sure you're okay. To have parking in the driveway, you know, when you have a 20-foot front setback, there's room obviously for vehicles there. There's presumably garage space too. So just because it's a duplex, I mean, I guess you could have the requirement that you have twice as much parking for a duplex then. I guess you could add that standard. But that's not a requirement in a duplex to have a certain number of parking spaces. I guess that's the key point.
It's one per dwelling unit.
Well, it's one per dwelling unit, right? But I mean, you can easily meet that one per dwelling unit just by parking in your driveway. So if that made sense, I got there in a roundabout way, but it wouldn't really be a meaningful standard.
Well, it would be meaningful if there was only a 1-car garage and a 1 wide driveway,
But that's still 2 parking spaces. in
right?
the
And you're
duplex.
parking somebody in the garage.
Right.
So
So,
that's why it'd be meaningful.
but do we really want to, well, if we want to create a standard where you have to have two vehicles that have access to the driveway without one blocking the other, I mean, I guess there's a way to do that, but I just think that gets,
I kind of think less is more
yeah.
sometimes.
I just want to
And-
make sure we're,
Yeah,
It's a good
you did
point.
mention parking before, so.
well,
But at the same time, like, if we're trying to increase housing,
right.
and if what you've put forward is sensible, I remember the 10,000 square feet addition, something about 7,500, that's a fairly large lot. So you're moving forward. That's a duplex, a 2 flat. I think my lot is only 4,000 square feet. And so, you know, we're creative on my side of the city. I'll tell you that, because we were platted for town of Middleton. And man, they get parked cars in there. When I would do doors, there'd be like 4 cars parked in a tiny little area, all paved. It was still paved, but people make it work. So
Yeah, I
let's
guess I'm
not
just
get caught.
concerned that there are streets in the city where there's no parking allowed on the street. And so that does make it more complicated if you don't also make sure that people can get in and out of their garages.
Yeah,
Like Middleton Hills, I think, has parking restrictions, right?
front side, yeah.
Yeah.
We,
I don't know
I
if there's
almost
other areas.
bought a house here in Middleton to live in Middleton, and I think there was 3 houses that shared a driveway, and we were supposed to park in the driveway. And I was like, this is not gonna work, but they make it work, because I did doors in. But it was something that made me think, no, I'm not gonna. But if you're looking for housing, we often work it out. But I'm glad you're asking these questions, because like you said, with Middleton Hills, there is that restricted parking.
Mhm.
So,
I think at
think it's
the
reasonable.
Workforce Housing Committee, I was actually the one that suggested that this go as conditional use. And it was because I was concerned that this idea of a neighbor putting a duplex in or converting a home to a duplex could be a surprise to someone next door. And I didn't want that to happen without it, being brought forward and discussed. I understand that the conditional use standards are, if they're met, and you really can't deny it. But it still gives us the opportunity to talk about it. I'm okay with it. Personally, I'm okay with it being permitted uses, but yeah, I guess if that's what the consultants want to do, to go that direction, I'd be okay with that. We're going to have to make sure that the residents of the city understand that, because this is a late addition to the zoning code.
Yeah.
Mayor, if I may suggest another way to look at this. So remember that the code allows by right, the proposed code allows an accessory dwelling unit by right. So that means any single family resident can have up to a 900 square foot dwelling unit.
yeah,
This second dwelling unit is simply a larger ADU in that sense, if you will. So and you wouldn't be allowed to have an ADU on top of that. So essentially, it's just saying, instead of allowing an ADU by right, you're allowed to have a second dwelling unit by right, as long as you meet the lot area standard. So it's really incrementally just a little bit more of a step. It's not like a leap. I wouldn't call it a leap beyond the concept that we have in place. It's a way to provide infill housing. You could have theoretically, this is actually something I did want to talk about at some point, but you theoretically could, if you have a deep lot, create a duplex that is oriented perpendicular to the front lot line. But there'd be some design standards, I guess, I'd want to discuss, so that you don't just have a garage, for example, facing the street, but I digress.
as you get
Yeah,
down that
too
road,
detailed,
I think I want to bring us back to just reminding us that housing is very expensive in Middleton. And I don't expect a lot of people tearing down their one single family home and putting up a duplex. Will it happen?
But they could convert.
They could
They
convert.
convert.
They've done that in
that's
other
what-
cities.
That's what I think would happen. I think there'd be some modifications and some conversions.
But I think we also need to be supportive of housing. in general, because we are so caring about our environment and our density and what we do have and the roads we've already built. I know you're great with my roads and bike lanes and everything. And when houses start at 400,000 in a city, but most of them are going for 500,000 to 600,000, it's a great way to bring families in or workforce. So I am supportive. We can agree to disagree. If you want it conditional, I can tell you, if it meets the standards, I'm okay with that. I think we have to be a little more supportive. So
I think either way, option one or option two, the infill is going to go in. And getting back to what Randy said, we are the good neighbor city. And part of being a good neighbor is being accepting of the new people. But that's hard when it feels like it's forced on you or it's a surprise. So I really appreciate what you said about this is an opportunity for the neighbors to get a notice that something's going to happen. They have time to think about it. They have time to raise their comments and have their voice just be heard, even if it doesn't change the outcome. It's an opportunity for discussion.
I think that's where I pause though, because at times when I've heard from people, they have said, well, I know nothing will change anyways. And then they get more frustrated. They seem more frustrated that they feel like there was a way to make a change. And I'm trying to think of an example, like maybe like a sidewalk or something, not housing, but where are we placing something? And they come to a public meeting and they share their thoughts. And then we did whatever we were going to do anyways.
It's like the decision was already made before the meeting.
Yeah. And then, so I don't know if there's a best way, or from what you've seen as staff. I've seen it when I was a councilwoman and when I did doors as mayor, that people would sometimes have those kind of comments where they were almost more frustrated that they came and they told their story and yet we voted.
So then the extension of this then is we should keep the ADUs as a conditional use too. That's the logic in my head here of what I'm hearing. And I'm not trying to be argumentative.
Yeah.
I'm just asking I'm pushing this idea because where's that line? The line is 900 square feet.
Yeah.
And suddenly if you're over 900 square feet, you don't have an ADU, but you have a duplex.
Right.
And
ADUs
suddenly you have to
rentable?
notify your neighbor. I'm sorry.
Are ADUs rentable or does it have to be
Yes.
somebody in the family? So you can rent out that unit
Yes.
on your
Yes.
property.
I guess you can rent out a duplex too.
But yeah,
And
fires,
I'm
that's
actually
the
surprised
owners.
we haven't gotten more feedback from people about that, because I think everybody thinks of them as mother-in-law apartments or, But
ADU, I'm sorry.
yeah, but if they are rentable, which I think is fine, I would expect to get some pushback from people. One thing we haven't talked about is the flip side of allowing two-family residential in single-family districts as a conditional use. Flip side of that was supposed to be adding single-family residential to the two-family
As a conditional
districts as a conditional use. So if we made the first case permitted by right, we should do the same for single-family housing going up in districts that are zoned for two-family residential. And we wanted the policy to not encourage people who can't find a lot big enough to put their McMansion on to buy a duplex lot, tear it down and put up their house. So I just bring that up because that's another consideration. The whole idea was to bring parity between these two types, the single family and the two family. So whatever we do, there should be parity between those two. And I'm comfortable making the change. I'm comfortable keeping it as a conditional use to have that conversation. Like you said, I think sometimes those conversations bring out the not good neighborly sentiments, but it's everyone. But I agree with Commissioner Erdman-Hermans that people want to be heard. And if our hands are tied and we really don't have the flexibility to make the change or to deny a conditional use, it's our duty to explain that in a way that people understand and feel like they've been heard.
The days of 9, 10 kids in a family are pretty much over. There's very few that would want to move into a multifamily district to build a big house on a lot to have their 10 kids in the same house, I guess. I'm trying to think of who would want to
Oh, I'm
move into
thinking
a
of-
multifamily neighborhood and build a McMansion.
I'm thinking of
Doesn't really-
people who don't have 10 kids, but have, 3 and maybe 5 cars. So,
So regarding ADUs. So on page, if you can go to page 157, please. Sorry to change that. on you. So I just thought it'd be helpful quickly to look at the standards for an ADU, starting with letter E. Just let me read those.
I think in particular, just wanted to highlight that accessory dwelling units, either the unit, the principal unit or the accessory unit must be occupied by the owner of the property, whereas in a duplex or a twin home, they could both, each unit be rentals.
What is
That's a
there?
good point.
That's a very good point. Is there another way of looking at this where we just allow ADUs to be larger than 900 square feet? And just keep it as is?
We did have a comment yesterday at the open house from somebody who requested consideration that the 900-foot standard be allowed to be larger for an ADU. I was going to mention that later.
Do you have a number in mind?
I wasn't going to restrict it. I was just going to allow it to be more than 900, so not have a restriction on the size of the ADU. But what that does do is it would alleviate some of the neighbors' concerns in that one of the units would be owner occupied.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I really like that idea because of what Abby just pointed out. So that language,
Like not to exceed.
well, yeah, there's that too, number 3, but it's number 2 that is the distinction that Abby pointed out.
What really concerns me about housing is when investment companies buy up buildings and then rent them back to people at an unaffordable rate to make a profit. Because for a lot of people in America, housing is basically their main investment. And if they're spending all of their money in rent, they're not building their personal wealth. And they're also paying more for it than they would if they weren't having to pay someone else's profit. And so seeing whole cities in parts of the US be turned over to rental housing in this like piecemeal way is very concerning. I mean, we have enough of a problem already right now with affordable housing here, so I wouldn't want to see that happen.
Okay, separating that is a very valid point. I think that has to be looked at from a different perspective, but maybe a future agenda type item or a thought process for a council to think about. Because here we're just talking about ADUs. And what does staff?
Come on. Smart growth, smartest growth that come.
I'm sorry, Sarah, are you talking to me? Can you mute yourself, please?
One thing I
Yeah.
wanted to mention is that the city cannot restrict principal home or a duplex from being rental occupied. So that's one thing that we don't really have any control over, and we don't really, until the census gives us new numbers, we often don't know if a duplex is owner occupied on one side, renter on the other, or both renter. So that's something that I don't think that we have the ability to regulate through zoning.
Thank you.
But in the case of the ADU,
Yes.
how are we going to handle it there?
Yeah, it's a good question too.
I thought you were working with permits.
Yeah.
And then we would have a sense of the number that we have. Because it does, I mean, the ADUs, I think, are interesting. There's not a lot of them in Madison once they converted to having them. They only had like 7 people actually do it. But I think they're interesting, especially if you have some people who are looking to do, whether it's Airbnb in a short term, or if it's 4-month rentals or year-long rentals. But it does give us a little bit of flexibility. And I really do like the idea of that year-long rentals, although we can't force that either, but our permitting process would tell us, what are these ADUs being used for? So, or theoretically, they would tell us if they're short-term or long. Not germane to this discussion, but do you need another clarifying?
So item 3 or number 3 on the screen. Are we saying that we would just strike that altogether?
I'm not seeing what you're saying. Oh, on the AD.
The maximum size.
Yeah, and then get rid of the duplex concept altogether? That would actually be the way to solve that. And it actually solves the other issue that came up yesterday at an open house.
Alder Hanero, how do you feel? Because this came out of workforce housing.
So you're saying change the accessory dwelling units to eliminate the maximum size. And then not allow duplexes as a permitted or conditional use in single family, because people could figure out how to use the ADU provision to fit in another
Unit, yeah. I mean, I think I got the idea from Commissioner Bruce. But the concern I heard was that from several of you was that you want to be able to provide notice to the neighbors, giving neighbors the right to be aware of this process. And at the same time, as written, the code allowed ADUs where anybody could rent up to 900 square feet. So why suddenly is the difference once you go over 900 square feet? Why suddenly does a neighbor need to know? And then Avi noted that with a duplex, both sides can be rented.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a theme that I've heard too, where people are concerned about, as Commissioner Erdman Hermans talked about, companies buying up, investment properties and renting everything, So I think this is the way to address the concerns we've heard here. But I'm happy to talk with our consultant further about it, but I think that would probably solve a couple of issues.
I agree. Could I make a motion on that? Do I need to make a motion? I don't need to make a motion. We're just discussing.
Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
discussing.
Well, so just to understand, so
I liked
you
it.
would not.
I was gonna
but
welcome the
Someone
motion.
could not convert their house into a duplex.
They
Under what
could
you're
essentially, they could convert it into 2 dwelling units. One would be considered accessory dwelling unit and would have to meet the other standards that are in here.
Would that be easier or harder than under what you're proposing, just using the ADU language as a way to do this? Would that make it easier for someone to do that or more difficult?
Easier for someone to have the second dwelling unit.
Mhm.
Well, an ADU is a standalone structure anyway, in terms of it's self-contained. I don't mean standalone physically necessarily. I just mean it's self-contained. It still has to adhere to the setback requirements, just like a duplex would. The difference would be the entrance can't be on the front elevation of an existing building, but maybe added to the side or rear. I mean, we could look at that as well. The thing is, at some point, if you have 2 1,500 square foot buildings, one's not accessory, So I think something should still keep it accessory, and the concept of ownership, having one side be owner occupied. And frankly, the way it's written, the owner could live in the ADU as well
Mhm,
and rent out the rest of the property.
mhm.
So we don't, we're being pretty flexible. One of the concerns we heard yesterday at the open house is why are we making more rules? And I said, well, actually, there's several aspects to our new zoning ordinance that provide greater flexibility and accomplish policy objectives of the city. So what were you gonna?
I was just gonna say, I do think one thing we need to look at and explore a little bit more is the component of the code that says that either the principal building or the accessory dwelling unit must be occupied by the owner of the property. I'm actually not sure how we could or would enforce that. Because if it's permitted as a use, how would we track it without going into access Dane and like doing research, which we would do if we got a complaint, but I don't know how we would enforce that. So that's something I think we need a little bit more information on.
That's regardless of regardless of how we handle this duplex issue.
Right.
I mean, maybe there's a permitting process, but
And could you maybe ask the other cities that have done this, what their experience is?
Yes.
It may not be frequent, but they might have a best practice to share. Do you have a thought?
I guess the other thing that this does for me is at least this ADU provision has been in the draft code for quite a while.
Mhm.
And we're not springing on this adding duplexes and single family zoning at the end of the process. So to me, it feels better. If we're going to do it as a permitted use, that we do it this way. And I'll let staff work out, whether we can have an owner restriction or not. That's just, it is what it is.
I had one additional thought, and that this may not be as successful as a duplex because of the lack of shared walls. There's less opportunity to have a building on the space that's large enough to hold a second family, perhaps. So I'm thinking if you share walls, you can get more building on the lot, right? If you need space between buildings
But
and
the
setbacks, then
ADUs can be attached, totally attached.
I thought they couldn't be attached.
oh yeah,
Yeah, they can be, they just.
attached or detached.
Okay.
Good clarifying question.
And I should also
It
add,
says freestanding somewhere, doesn't it?
and since it's on the screen, I'll just mention to you that we have stricken number 5 in the working draft of the code based on previous guidance that we got. I just wanted you to be aware of that regarding exterior finishes. I just didn't want you to see it on the screen and think it was still there.
Thank you for the update. Okay, so because on the last agenda item, I missed number 6, I'm just going to double check that we're going over everything because Commissioner Urban Hermans was great at catching that. So I'm going to make sure I make her happy because I'm guessing she's detail oriented and that makes me happy because I'm not. So you have to help. Now I saw there was one on the zoning map as well as lighting code. Do you want to cover? And am I missing anything else? Okay.
I don't think we're ready to move on from this, are we?
Are
Because
we?
we need to.
We've got a long list.
So we need
Oh,
to.
my
We're still on the
apologies.
ADU, so we need to take out number 3. Is that correct?
Well, I highlighted it, yeah.
And then we don't think we can enforce number 2, or no, we can enforce number 1.
We don't know about that. We're going to research that.
Can we enforce number 2?
I think you can on
The
number
answer is
1.
definitely true because you can't have separate ownership on the same
On the
parcel.
same parcel, okay.
What about if, can it not be condoized?
And that would be a condo.
Plat.
It wouldn't be a plat necessarily.
I know one of the major factors here is that we are hoping that the accessory dwelling units would be able to share the same water and sewer
I see, yes.
lateral.
Mhm.
And I know that there are a lot of public service commission regulations around that, so I don't know if how the condo factor would affect it. Because
Well,
if
when we
we
say-
require the individual service to the ADU versus the principal building, that adds about 20,000 in costs.
if not more. But I think, and now I got two codes in my head, so I'm confused. But when we have people who've requested separate ownership of a duplex, that's where we require their separate utilities.
Right.
But I think a way around that is the condo form, I thought. But I might be really confused. So getting back to this, we're researching number one in terms of the ownership and how to enforce that. Number two, we're leaving unchanged. Number three, we're proposing to strike. Number four remains in place, and number five is already stricken. And then we would remove the duplex reference from either as a permitted or conditional use. That's what I heard. Move on.
Yeah, I guess one thought on that ownership again is if somebody were living in a place, had an accessory dwelling unit, and then that person needed to move to like memory care or something, but the family wasn't selling the house yet, right? Now there's the same family still owns the property and is still renting to the same people, but maybe it's not occupied by the owner anymore. You know, I think it does get a little bit hairy. It could get a little bit messy, but those might be pretty few and far between.
I was
And
gonna say, I think
the city doesn't bother to try and enforce it and it's not a problem, then maybe it's just not a problem.
and maybe that's how we just carry that forward, is with that compassionate intent, that if there is bridges of time where it's unoccupied due to transition, that we're just understanding. Not that it has to be written in, but I like that you're thinking about that, because over 20 years, this will happen.
I appreciate all this discussion and the creativity in using the accessory dwelling unit provision. I'm still more comfortable accepting the Workforce Housing Committee's recommendation, but if the rest of the commission feels otherwise, I get the feeling this won't be the last time we're going to be reviewing the draft. So perhaps we can all like agree to consider this change, but maybe think about it, because it just seems like there's more to it than we're catching right now, I feel. So that's all I have to say.
We're doing research. Abby's already reached out to our intern to do some research, so.
Okay.
maybe
I
she's-
will say I generally would go with the feedback option, but nationally they say that the feedback process on planning is what increases costs of housing. When you look at it at the macro level. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, the workforce housing would have recommended this as a permitted use with duplexes on single family lots, but the concern was, well, we don't want to surprise the neighbors, right?
Right.
So.
Maybe that gets put in as a standard. When you have a duplex, you need to notify your neighbor. I don't know.
okay.
All right, we'll do more research. Sorry, I didn't intend that to be such a long discussion, but it was helpful.
Well, they're big changes and I think the discussion is warranted.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It
Mhm.
was a good discussion. Number two, Mayor, is simply residential densities on certain land uses. Just a quick question. I think Commissioner Bruce is the one who expressed interest in this. Does this address your concern?
I think it's an improvement for sure. I think if I look at the standards that we've got in the draft code, I can visualize some densities that would exceed even these numbers by, you know, a factor that would make somebody pause. And so I want to make sure that we don't get ourselves in a bind by listing them at all. You know, I thought, well, why, if it's just a form-based code, why do we need the unit densities listed at all? If the unit densities are important, then I think then we should make sure that they're appropriate and are treated as a maximum density or not something that is flexible, because once we start bending the rules on that density, where do we stop?
And I think one of the things, like one of the questions workforce housing had was the phrasing. It says up to and then approximate. So maybe it's just leaving it at approximate, and that way it's a little bit more fuzzy in, you know, the densities allowed. Because the up to kind of gives it like a hard cap, and then approximate is more fuzzy. So
But what would happen, Daphne, if somebody came in on the medium density? I think is it recognize, or right now is it 30 units per acre? What if someone were to meet all the requirements of the setback requirements and impervious surface ratios and so forth, but came in with something that was at 40 or 45 units an acre? Then is it denied?
But I don't think mathematically that would work because of the dimensions of the lot and setbacks. I mean, I just think they're designed to go together in general. You know, I think if you have a 5 acre lot, and I don't want to give an example because I can't do the math that fast,
But we also have bonus stories that we're giving out too. And our ISRs are pretty high. If you do underground parking and don't do surface parking, you're really talking about mostly building on the lot. And I think we could get some pretty high densities. I'm not arguing against that. I think that's okay. But I just don't know whether we want to have a conflict with approximate densities. And if we think that it's important, then let's just do it, but make sure that they're what we want.
so does this satisfactory? Do the new numbers, are they satisfactory? I think you started by saying yes.
I don't know. What I said was I think they're better. I would have I'll tell you which one I think the high density I think could be higher. I think, I certainly see developments at 80 units an acre. The medium density seems like that could go to 40. The low density could go to 20. And a mixed use neighborhood at 12 seems quite low to me.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's kind of where I would land. This is just me talking off right now.
Well, yeah, my comment was I have no basis for deciding on densities, so I feel, in good company. I did note that going from 100 for the MRH to greater than 60, I mean, that's a big jump going from medium to high, 30 to 60. I think we got rid of that's for, I know 100 is greater than 60, but still, somebody could come in with 61. And then why change the mixed use neighborhood, but not the other mixed use ones? I agree that mixed use neighborhood does seem low. I know it's currently 10 and it's recommended to increase to 12.
Maybe Mark, maybe I'd feel more comfortable if I understood why we have the approximate densities.
They were just intended to be they're part of the intent statement. If you can go back to so this is an example of how one reads. Oh, almost, there we go. There we go. So each zoning classification has an intent statement. And it's just was meant to convey, to help communicate what the approximate gross density is for reference purposes, not regulatory purposes. They're guideposts. If you want us to just remove the density statement, that's that's fine with me. I thought it was a quick snapshot too. But I did look up, for example, Is it called? Is this
Cardinal
across from Paul's? It's called the Cardinal.
Cardinal Row.
Cardinal Row. And I think that had 16 units. And that's on 20, that's on just over half an acre. So that makes your point. Now, I don't remember what the zoning map showed that as, if that was low or medium, but that might make Randy's point right away.
Well, it's PDD, so.
Oh, it is PD. Oh, never mind. So anyway, if you want us to, if you would rather we remove the density statement altogether, I don't, there's no, it's not regulatory, so we can do that.
I guess I would like you to, I guess my recommendation would be to discuss it with your consultants and follow their advice with the understanding that we're concerned that we're maybe creating a conflict within the code.
Well, I did, and the response was the word guidepost and not regulatory, but that was the response.
So,
right.
Well, I would ask if we get rid of the intent, this part of the statement of intent that indicates up to approximate densities. If we take out the number, what's the difference between low, medium, and high?
It's based on
Lot size.
lot size, setbacks,
Height.
height, yeah,
and ISR.
yes, and pervious surface ratios.
I kind of feel like there should be some guidepost. I like the guidepost idea. I don't like up to approximately.
What I've changed it to read is that they would say, so in this case, single family detached dwelling units with approximate gross densities of is how I've changed one of them. And that's how I would do all of them. Or we could do a range. Well,
It's just simple. Let's keep it.
okay. Trying to help.
Yeah, I think
I
taking
know.
out up to and replacing it with
With approximate gross densities of 5 or whatever the new number is, 6 is what it would be.
What would you think, Mark, with just saying up to a certain number?
But then you're capping, that goes against the
Yeah,
idea that you had earlier.
simple. Let's keep it simpler. Right? We have a lot and it's gonna be a lot. I mean, when things come in front of us.
Okay. Then
I think I've got feedback, the consensus of going with width.
okay.
With these
And
new
then
numbers.
are with these numbers here?
Yeah, and the mixed use neighborhood, to answer that question about 12. Remember that there's a mixed use component to the building. So this is just a residential density, but there's supposed to be well, there theoretically can be a mixed use component to the building. There doesn't have to be.
And
But
well, and the larger mixed use, like the MUA Avenue and urban, those do not have any density, numbers to them. So they could be, any density really. And so it's just MUN neighborhood. We wanted it to be of the same scale as the surrounding neighborhood. So that's why we included those, since it is so proximate to residential.
Is there any concern with a developer trying to argue their way into a different zone because they don't want to provide a certain amount of impervious surface or non-impervious surface or other things that the city would really want for water management or something else when they're between these numbers and we don't have any caps on them? So if, I don't know, say there's a building going in and they have a ratio of 40, which is right between, or 45, right between like 30 and 60. Is there any problem here?
you're talking about densities.
Yeah.
No, those are just guideposts. The issue with the regulations is the second page of each classification is where we have all the standards for density, intensity, bulk regulations. And if suddenly somebody wanted, had trouble, I guess the short answer to your question is you have to meet these standards. If they don't work for what you're trying to do, you can apply for rezoning, I guess, if there's something more favorable, but that the city has that discretion to not accept
To
that.
deny.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the neighbors are notified, of course, with that process. Number 3, can we move on? Height exception density bonus approach. This again raised the issue of conditional use permits. And what we have several questions here. You wanted this tied to affordable housing and net zero design buildings with the Plan Commission support limiting height bonuses to apartments and mixed use buildings. I'm trying to remember now what I meant by that.
This is because the density bonuses are only tied to originally multiplexes,
Yes, right.
townhouses,
Right.
live work units, and apartments and mixed uses. But we discussed, and
Yep.
usually with townhouses, it's all like, it'll be 3 stories, but it's
Mhm.
all one unit. So then adding a second or adding another story to that doesn't actually increase the unit. It just increases more space for one person's townhouse. Same with live work and for multiplexes, they're all kind of similar in that sense.
So we felt it would be easier just to apply to those two. Everyone nodding? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. And the next one on the same category is, I just wanted to flag what the effect of all this is for each of these districts. For multifamily low and medium, it would be adding, or for low, it doesn't add a story. For medium, it adds 1 story. From going from 4, which is the maximum, to 5, and then high would be adding up to 2 stories. And as Commissioner Hanairo already alluded, what we're proposing is to strike the multifamily urban category, which originally allowed a building of 5 stories up to 7 with the conditional use, and multifamily high originally is 5 stories up to 10 with the conditional use. And we are proposing simply to eliminate multifamily urban and replace it with multifamily high of 7 stories as a conditional use. So 5 permitted and then up to 2 stories, which would be linked to the LURA and net zero category bonus. What's the word I want? Height bonuses. Thank you. So that's the explanation for multifamily and similar approach for mixed use.
And the argument for that was if anyone wanted to go higher than the 7 stories, they would have to rezone to the MUU district.
Right.
And then that could be, 10 up to 12 if they do the density or the height bonuses.
That is highly unlikely to happen east of Parmenter Street. We are not we're not mapping anything as MUU east of Parmenter Street.
Okay, that makes sense. Anybody
Good.
feel about,
That seems appropriate to me.
Good. Thank you.
sounds good, thank you. Next,
We're flying along.
I'm so glad.
Oh, and then finally for the height bonuses related to net zero, there are a lot of different standards for net zero. And it's really hard to require a developer upfront to get, LEED certified or any of these other certifications. And so we recommend saying designed to be, LEED, silver, gold, platinum, whatever, or designed to be, carbon zero or zero energy or zero carbon. And so there are 3 different standards that are typically used. There's LEED, which is the most widely known. However, most of the ordinances that I looked through required it to be designed to LEED silver, and that doesn't necessarily mean net zero. It just means a little bit more energy efficient. Then there's the International Living Future Institute and the Passive House Institute, and those both have you can design it to be zero carbon and to be designed to be certified in that way. So I don't know if any of you guys have a preference, and we can certainly do more research into that.
Alder Hanero, this came out of Sustainability Committee,
Yes.
and what was the discussion and what was there?
I'm not on that committee,
Sorry.
but no, that's fine. I used to be. I guess I would accept the staff's recommendation of either the International Living Future Institute or the Passive House Institute US, whichever, and perhaps consult Kelly Hilliard to see what they would recommend. I would like to go back to this the additional stories though for Allura or net zero design, specifically the two options that staff put in there about, because it says for MRH, property can add up to 2 additional stories if they do the Lura agreement and or incorporate net zero design.
Yeah.
Are we comfortable saying, yeah, you can have 2 if you do either of those things? Or because that seems attainable. Having them do both may be more difficult.
Thank you for flagging that. I forgot to pause there.
Yeah, and then we have the same question on the mixed use urban.
The way it's written now, you get one for each, one for the Lura and one for the net zero, right?
No, the way it's written now for these, for MRH and MUU, not the red. I'm looking at the black
Oh,
test.
I see, I
text.
see.
Yep.
Yeah, and just, I'm sorry, I made this more confusing than it needed to
I
be.
went to the back.
The way it's written on the bullet point on the screen is not the way it's written in the ordinance.
Mhm.
I'm suggesting that we do the and or for the reasons that Alder Haniro just mentioned, because it seems more attainable. But the other option would be to just require both if you wanted the 2 stories. So I'm sorry for confusing you. So if you prefer a more flexible approach, giving property owners a more flexible approach, then the black text is what I'm hearing would be the way to go. Lisa,
That's what I would go with.
any objections to that? Okay, good. Is there any more feedback?
No. Yeah.
All right, live, work, buildings. We had some discussion last time about this, and I realized I didn't quite guide that discussion very well. So the neighborhood commercial service concept already really is embodied in the live, work language. If you scroll down, please, what was my question that I had? So the highlight, the text, the italicized text indicates the point I'm making. The commercial component of the live work building is limited to the following land uses only if such uses are really permitted by right or by conditional use permit in the applicable zoning district. So we have that language in there already. The question is, do we want to allow to indicate that the commercial uses listed above are allowed as conditional uses within the live work structure? So I'm asking if that's something we want to do. And then the other question is, should live work units be allowed in a 2-family flat zoning classification and possibly other zoning districts? This is in response to comments we've received that there's a desire to have more neighborhood services in different parts of the city. But just some ideas we had.
Because I was not here last time. This is a little unclear to me. So can you maybe
I tried to
describe a little
clarify
more?
it. Maybe we should go to section 100308. Go there.
So if I remember our discussion, we were talking about like what neighborhood commercial uses would we want? I think we talked about like a pharmacy, well, maybe not a pharmacy for live work, but.
I've got the code coming up here. Lisa.
But you're saying, Mark, the section already lists the 5 permitted commercial.
Right.
Uses for a live work building.
And so you're about to see it here. So the code. There it is. So under B, 1B, those are the 5 types of uses. And what we are suggesting is these would be allowed in the 4 mixed use districts which allow the commercial uses listed here. And they would be allowed as conditional uses in the multifamily districts, which do not allow the commercial uses as either permitted or conditional uses. And that's what I found was a flaw. I think that's a defect in the code. So because the modifying language in this section says that it has to be a permitted or conditional use in the underlying zoning district, but then immediately in multifamily, you can't have commercial. So that was confusing. So what I'm suggesting is, what if we modify this section 1003 number 1 to indicate that the commercial uses listed are allowed as conditional uses within the live work structure located in a multifamily zoning district. So that's the issue, is that the multifamily zoning district would not normally allow any of these 5 uses. And I'm thinking, if we're going to allow live work units in a commercial district, in a multifamily district as a conditional use, then we should allow the commercial component. That's essentially what I'm wanting to make sure that you're okay with me. So imagine a Spring Tree Apartments, I'll just pick on them. If somebody wanted to establish or maybe through redevelopment, establish as a conditional use, a live work series of live work buildings or mixed use buildings with live work format, we would allow those as a conditional use. I don't think there's any objection to that, but I wanted to flag it as a change.
I like the flexibility.
Okay.
I think we should expand. I agree. And I think we should expand the uses because I don't see any way to get a daycare in here. I think that there's still things that people would want in their community that aren't represented here.
I think the other thing you were speaking of last time was the small grocery
Yeah.
as well with the food deserts.
Yep. Deli, desert.
So we're
Deli, desert.
essentially creating a conditional use process then to allow commercial activity. So we're essentially helping make it a mixed use building through a conditional use process. So, okay. That's on the feedback, if that's the consensus of it. Okay, thank you.
So we're adding daycare.
Well, yeah, daycare and well, but the list is currently personal professional service.
Right, I saw the list of 5, but I mean, the other conditional uses for these also, I mean, they include a group daycare of 9 or more children. So I don't know why we wouldn't, or, like anything where a live work unit is listed as a conditional use, right below it is group daycare center. So I think adding the daycare to the list of allowed commercial uses is fine. I could see, well, it's one person occupying or one family occupying the building, correct? So food isn't an issue with like rodents or anything like that. It wouldn't be
Indoor sales and service includes food.
does it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I just was double checking that. So the way our land use categories are structured they're intended to be more thematic. And then each one is described actually in the same section here under Article 3. And indoor sales and service examples not limited to general merchandise stores, grocery stores, butchers, sporting goods stores, antique shops, etc.
I was just gonna note with regard to daycare, in-home daycares, which are 4 to 8 children, those are already permitted in all of the residential districts, the institutional, and all of the mixed use.
And that was my next statement as well. So that's already added as well. Thank you. So I don't think we really need to add much. The issue is that we just need to make sure that this is allowed as a conditional use in a multifamily district. So that's what this all boils down to.
Is pet grooming and pet daycare allowed? I'm just trying to think of the stuff people need to get to. If they can walk to it before having to get on the bus to commute, that's best because our buses are basically just for commuting.
So we have a separate category for commercial animal daycare, which is not listed in this case. And I think one of the concerns there is that you said pet grooming specifically is what you said?
Grooming and
daycare, which means there'd be an outdoor run and dogs.
Yeah.
And so I think the concern is that I've seen this, I know there's been some concerns in the town of Middleton recently with the dog daycare. So I think I'd be concerned about compatibility in a multifamily district for that. So I guess I would suggest we keep the list the way it is, but just allow it as, list them as conditional uses in a multifamily district. So,
Would pharmacy be allowed?
yeah. Okay, I'm hearing no objections to that.
It's a great change.
Thank you. Sorry, that was a little bit more complicated. It needed to be 2 meetings in a row with that one. Exterior building design standards.
We already covered this.
We covered this. Okay, so I don't need to, yeah, I'm just showing you that that's what we did. Okay, thank you.
So what did you change?
We just struck the language.
This is for ADUs that they
We-
have to be matching
yeah.
the primary.
I mentioned that earlier.
thing. Yeah.
So glad
I
to
like
get rid of
the one bad apple design could shine a negative light. And I'm inclined to go with the Osmond family and say one bad apple doesn't spoil the whole bunch.
And then this was also mentioned in the minutes, when Alder Hanira wanted the minutes corrected, so we will have this corrected.
I
as
fixed,
well.
so I've
Yeah.
already changed the working draft to change the words by up to 50%. So it's already fixed.
Good.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'll take this one too. Number 7 is off-street electric vehicle parking standards. So the concern here, the consensus last time was to leave the percentages and the figure unchanged, but to add a requirement to install a minimum of 2 level 2 chargers. This was modeled after Madison.
And then the question is, if we eliminate the parking on the site, should that also eliminate the 2 chargers that we had required
Right.
in the parking?
I think yes. No parking, no charger.
Number 8 is just showing you what we did there. No need to have any further discussion. Number 9, Herb Garn, among others, but especially Herb, has been promoting this idea. Our consultant's response was to rely on the stormwater ordinance and subdivision ordinance, which we are planning to overhaul next year, that those might be better places to address low impact development standards. I'd invite any reaction you have to that. I mean, at this point, Abby reminded me the other day too, that at some point we want to get the ordinance completed and we can always anticipate that we'll have to make some changes to it. But there's nothing wrong with going through the ordinance and seeing where we can make other improvements. But at some point, where do we draw that line and just get the ordinance adopted? And then, so I guess that would be my response there. But we're certainly not averse to any good suggestions along those lines. And as we rewrite the subdivision ordinance, I fully expect that could identify some tweaks we need to make to the zoning ordinance. So I guess that if you're okay with that as a response. And Herb, if you're watching, I'm sorry.
I am too. And the stormwater ordinance will be revisited next year as well. And could someone just please communicate to Herb Garn what we're doing with his comment?
Yeah, I want to emphasize, I'm not trying to be dismissive of it. I just, I
Well,
think it's
and
important.
I guess one more thing to note is I don't remember if it was something that Herb Garn had provided to us or if it was something that we found through our own research. But we did find a toolkit, a government toolkit where you can go through all of your city ordinances and look at how they meet. Our intern has started to work on the checklist, but that was kind of what led us to think, well, okay, this is going to take a lot of time and effort to make sure that it's incorporated throughout all of the city code. And it's maybe something that we could come back as like a second draft. And I think this is maybe the point in the zoning ordinance process too, that we should start reminding elected officials and commissioners that when the ordinance is adopted, that is not going to be the final done deal. We will inevitably, within the first year, we're gonna find a number of changes. So there's always gonna be an opportunity to continue to look at it and improve on that.
I like the idea of evolving. Sounds good. We can.
I mean, the
keep
main
it.
issue now is we just don't want to create things that are, that will cause us problems and have holes that are, creating legal issues. I mean, that's obviously the most important thing right now, is to make sure we have a code that's workable, functional, and addresses our policy objectives, and tinkering is to be expected, just like with our comp plan. Okay, item 10, mindful of the hour lighting regulations. You requested more information about potentially prohibiting lighting used to outline a building, structure, window. Our consultant gave us a couple photos. We could remove this prohibition and never run into an issue, but if there are issues that arise, we will not have anything to rely on in terms of enforcement. So that's the language from our consultant, essentially. Holiday lighting is not included in this provision as currently written. So what do you want us to do with the language? Is the question.
I thought the pictures were helpful. They illustrated what the intent was. I didn't quite understand the intent when I read the ordinance language originally, and I'm comfortable with leaving it in if this is what we're trying to accomplish.
Comfortable leaving in the prohibition on the two.
Must have come from somewhere that this was a problem.
I think the concern is the dark skies, trying to eliminate as much unnecessary light as possible. I guess I'm wondering, we do allow spotlighting for decorative purposes, right?
You're not talking holidays, you're talking.
I'm not talking holidays. I'm
Okay.
talking, lights that aren't really for security so much as to.
They're not supposed to be uplighting. We don't, if that's what you meant by spotlight. I'm not sure what you mean by a.
Yeah, like those lights that people put to shine on their house. so that
Oh,
it looks-
something like that.
Yeah,
Like that's on the ground and
yeah.
goes towards the house,
I
yeah.
think as long as there's like it can be shown upward as long as there's like an eave or something that cuts it off as well. I think there are those provisions in the lighting ordinance.
Because
too.
to me, if we would allow that type of lighting, I don't see why we wouldn't allow at least what's on the top there. That's a residence, it looks like. I wonder though, we had talked about perhaps having a maximum amount of lumens. I noticed there's a reference to 400 watts and 100 watts. Don't we need to be referring not to watts, but rather to lumens in every case? Because we're not really, especially if everybody's shifting to LEDs, that reference to watts is less meaningful.
That's true.
Good point.
Thanks for illuminating that. One every meeting, sorry. So I will follow up with our consultant on that.
Yeah, I looked up the Illuminating Engineering Society Model Ordinance, and they use lumens. They refer to the total installed initial luminaire lumens. And then they go on to talk about how the effects of light pollution are all functions of the fixture or the luminaire design and installation. So I could live with the top picture. If I lived next to the Wings Pizza, I'd not be happy with that, but actually the neon Wings Pizza lunch specials is just as bright as the purple. But again, if we'd allow someone to have, a light shining on their house or a couple lights shining on their house, how is that not as bad as what we see in that picture with the blue outlining?
Valid point.
I thought this was more to do with commercial spaces than residential. I'm thinking of, do you know where Quivy's Grove is? It's down in Fitchburg, so you drive down 151 and then West PD, take a quick left south. That road, Nesbit Road. And there's a bank on the corner that has like what looks like bare light bulbs lining the entire rooftop. The thing just lights up that like, yeah.
So not a model for dark skies.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was my vision of what we're trying to avoid, right?
That- I
Not
would
lights
agree
on
with
the
that.
south,
That's
end,
not
like
ideal.
rope lights. It could be confused with holiday lights.
So I just wanted to, I'm just going to the lighting ordinance on page 4. Residential fixtures, any new light fixtures 1,600 lumens and over. Any new outdoor light fixtures above the eave or any new light fixture attached to buildings or poles separate from the residence must comply with the provisions of this ordinance. So it's 1,600 lumens. I wonder how that compares to watts, but we'll figure that out. But that's the standard. That's when the ordinance applies. So to answer Commissioner Urban Herman's, some residential fixtures are regulated as well. There's general standards. I'm not going to go through all this now, but we'll double check the 400 watts. And it sounds like we're going to leave the code as written, for Commissioner Bruce's observations. Okay. There was nothing for fencing standards that you asked us to change, so we're just acknowledging that. Item 12 is the last one, and then we still have a few others to get through. Landscaping standards. Do we need to make any changes to what the code currently states?
Well, trees are already favored by like 40, they've got 40 points versus 2 for plants. And again, I really have no basis for judging whether that's sufficient, but it seems like they already are favored. I guess I would suggest talking to Eric and maybe watching the video of the WRMC meeting where they talked about this to see what was their recommendation. Did they not realize the trees were favored by the point system, or did they feel like there should be more points awarded for trees?
One of the responses to that discussion was that Ken Potter on WRMC had a certain species that and I followed up with him on what he favored, and he suggested willows. That was his response.
Because of what they did for water.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uptake
Yeah.
of water.
And that's the one bit of follow-up I got from him from that discussion.
But they also grow into your water main.
Yeah.
That's
and-
due birch.
Yeah, from an architectural standpoint, I wouldn't want to see a bunch of willow trees.
What's that?
I guess I wouldn't want to see a bunch of willow trees for architecturally. I don't think that's necessarily appropriate.
Yeah, plus they take up a huge amount of space and they're softwood, so they easily come down in storms. Like, I think there's other considerations with some of these species. I mean, it should be just considered on the site. You can't just say this, I mean, willow's not going to grow on every site anyway.
So I don't really have any specific guidance here other than I felt the original point system seemed reasonable to me. I didn't have any objections from our Parks and Rec staff. We didn't get any specific suggestions other than willows from water resources. So
I don't have any good experience really with analyzing points on a landscape thing. I just, what my only question was, is does it make any sense for us to reach out to a couple of designers that we see all the time, the Bruce Company or Psyche Design, to just take a quick look at the landscape
Sure.
design and just provide any feedback, that they might have.
And I will do that. Good suggestion. And then I would also say this is an area that we can always make changes in the
Yeah.
future.
Sure.
So,
Right.
okay. Can we plow ahead a little bit? Because this is where we got stuck last time.
Can I ask a question? I thought the WRMC also asked, why would we exempt ag and single family, 2-family residential from the landscaping requirements? Or maybe that was the plan.
Ag, and I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Ag and both single family and 2-family.
Oh, well, we don't do design review for single family, 2-family buildings now.
Okay.
And ag would just be I don't remember how the lane, if you say that's what's in there, then that must be what's in there.
Okay.
But yeah, we don't do design review for those areas. There were additional ordinance revisions. I've already touched on number 1. And you've already said that you concur with this approach. So we no longer will have a multifamily urban classification, which is, I really appreciate, because then we can just have one urban classification, and that's for mixed use. The nice thing is that it also incentivizes mixed use as higher buildings. So I think this really makes a lot of sense. Number 2, accessory building setbacks. This is a minor change, but the original draft said 2 feet for a setback. Now we're going to go to 3. I talked to a few people about that at the open houses, and they understood why. Shoreline zoning, we don't need to cover this too much. We have received language in the last few days from our consultant that we're going to incorporate. There's been extensive discussions with our stormwater engineer. And so I think between Abby, me, and the stormwater engineer, we've come up with an approach that is going to work. So I don't think there's a need for any discussion there. A few things have come up in addition to this list. You received a letter recently from the town of Middleton raising concerns about
Town of Middleton and Town of Springfield.
Springfield, sorry. Thank you. And that had to do with the zoning classification air, the intent of which would apply to an airport. And if you wanted to go through this, go ahead.
Yes, so the letter was sent directly to the plan commissioners, and our staff took a look at how other communities are zoning their airports. And in the 4 communities that we looked at, it was about 50-50, with 50% being airport specific, the other 50% being in other classifications. And then we looked at our current zoning regulations for our airport, the GIP SIP document, and then what we're proposing in the AIR district. And in light of the town's concerns, and after discussing this with our city administrator, we really didn't see a compelling reason to rezone the airport at this time to air. So we had really only just shown that on the draft zoning map as a way to reduce the number of PDDs that we are administering. But I think that it would be prudent at this point for us to just take some additional time to look at the town's concerns that they had expressed. And also just maybe as a suggestion that was made by Commissioner Bruce, we might want to just take a closer look at the AIR district permitted and conditional uses, before we move forward with the zoning ordinance. What we are proposing at this time is that we would maintain the PDD zoning for the airport. So the zoning for the airport would not change, but we would also recommend that we keep the AIR district within the zoning ordinance. Our staff will do some additional research and look at the concerns that were raised by the towns and the list of permitted and conditional uses in that district. And we might have some suggestions for changing those as well. But we would not be proposing to map the AIR district anywhere within the city at this point in time.
And I would add to that we considered another option too. I think that was in Abby's memo or email that she sent today, but we decided this was the better approach as opposed to making it a conditional use in an institutional district and had its own institutional. And the other point I would make is that the rationale for having the AIR district is no different than the extraction district. So we have, we aren't mapping anywhere in the city for extraction, but it's available. I think as we need to have that use be, that opportunity be available, but we may not ever find that that's suitable to have extraction anywhere. So that's how we, again, getting back to the conditional use discussion, we've been advised to have more zoning districts to deal with these land uses.
I appreciate all of that. And I do want to say I saw that letter and I read their concerns. So I think it's reasonable what you've said, and I appreciate it.
Yep, I agree.
So then a few other issues on this category are side setbacks versus porch setbacks. This is something that came up at the open house. There's some specific numbers that a couple people pointed out to me that need to be that I need to analyze, and so I don't have a recommendation for that yet, but I will do that. For example, why is a porch setback in one case 6 feet here, but then another district it's less, and how does that relate to the side setback of the structure? So there's some consistency that's fairly minor in scope, in my opinion, but we're looking into that. And similarly, another issue that I figured out as a problem is these single family high density. The rear setbacks, you already have that. So this is actually a bigger problem than, I didn't realize this until recently, but the intent with the SRH district is to have these be alley served lots. Obviously, Clark Street, which has small lots, Middleton Beach Road, which has small lots, none of the areas that we are proposing be mapped with as SRH are alley served currently. The idea was going forward that when new development occurs, whether it's in Red Tail Ridge or wherever, that in order to have this type of zoning classification, you'd have alley served lots. So the problem is, as written, a garage could have a rear setback of minimum 2, maximum 4. So obviously that doesn't make sense when there's not an alley. So we are going to make some changes to this as well. We also have, in response to open house feedback, I was reminded that we've had a couple people who have said on some of their narrow lots, especially in downtown, near downtown, when they put in a detached garage, it's already hard to get past the house, but then they put it in their backyard. Actually, you'll be familiar with this, Aaron. And then suddenly you can't have a 30-foot or 25-foot rear setback. So there's some other things we are needing to still revisit. So I just wanted to flag that for you. Again, nothing here that I think is a huge deal. I think we basically just make a distinction between when there's an alley present and when there isn't. That's how we will take care of that. Any feedback on any of these things?
It sounds good, Mark. I'd also seen a letter come by from Roger Schenk about.
That's who I'm referring to.
Okay.
Yeah. Then there's additional changes identified by committees that planning staff advised not making. This is something we didn't get to last time.
Mark, at this time, I just want the minutes to reflect that Abby Atune has left the room.
Okay, we'll do. They will. I was going to do that. Thank you. And the reason is she's accused herself from participating in this, just so we have that on the record. So short-term rentals, there had been a suggestion to I'm sorry, I haven't read this for a while now. So there was a question about not having a city licensing requirement. There was questions about why we would have that approach, in part due to the burden this adds to limited city resources. But I've confirmed with our building inspector that it is appropriate and prudent from a public safety standpoint for the city to do annual inspections to ensure there aren't any building code issues. This would not be a duplicative process of Madison-Dane County Public Health, which is a current process that anyone with an Airbnb, a legal short-term Airbnb, a short-term rental has to follow now already. So I don't remember which committee had made that. That was CDA actually, I think, where that question came up. So we are recommending keeping the ordinance as is. And then for parks, rec and zoning, there had been some discussion. Actually, Nick, you'll remember this discussion. The minimum lot size below 3 acres. And we had a member of the Parks Board asking whether food and beverage counter sales and walk-in pickup land use regulations are too restrictive. Typo. But after discussing this with our Parks and Rec director and looking at other standards around the country, we do not recommend or advise making any changes to this section.
Mark, the question I had on this one was, So this is saying that we can't have a park that's less than 3 acres in size? Is that what?
I think our code was proposing, I think the code specifically says 3 acres is a minimum size. Nick, help me out if you remember.
I think that was accurate. Where this got brought up is with lack of, area to expand the city and with increased growth of population, trying to keep the amount of acreage per resident, parkland per resident in with the standards. We have to be kind of creative in where parks end up going. And case in point, there's a park off Market Street behind like a new playground off of Market Street behind the bike path. It's hidden.
I know where it is.
But that would not come close to that 3 acre minimum. And the question is, well, we might need to create parkland in places that isn't traditional for parkland. So is this going to restrict us from doing that? As the population continues to grow, but the land itself, but on the same amount of land.
I agree. So maybe I just don't quite understand, because I would be supportive of having parks smaller than 3 acres if we can get it, if that helps facilitate some usable open space.
And I think, Mark, I think the conversation then went, this would be for essentially apply to new development as opposed to taking current city-owned land or, and making it a park. If that makes sense.
Right. So all of our current parks in the city, there are a ton of them that are less than 3 acres, and they are going to be rezoned to this PR district. And then this standard is mostly for any new developments with new parks. And it's just because I believe the Parks Department, maintaining those small, like 5 small parks is a lot more difficult than maintaining one, 3 acre park with all the amenities that they need. So that was kind of the thought behind this standard.
On the other hand, it's lovely to have a little pocket park just a few blocks away that your kids can walk to, and it's just your neighbors there.
Yeah, I can see both sides of this. As a former Parks member, this came up a lot, and especially when you have developers constantly paying fees in lieu and not providing that.
So what is your guidance that you'd like to provide?
My opinion is that I would like to see parks less than 3 acres allowed.
Yeah.
I don't know what that size limit would be.
Infill parks.
I think the other part of this was, if a developer says, fine, we're going to grant you land, but that land is not the appropriate size for a park, how do we handle that then? Because we've had a couple of proposals, I feel, come our way that, like they're going to give us a token amount of land, but it's not feasible to actually have a park or a playground or anything recreational use. So having a minimum standard would prevent that from happening. And, they would end up, of course, paying the fee in lieu, but, it's a tough one. Sometimes it's tough to make those decisions, but we also have to look at the usability of what we're getting. That makes sense.
For sure. Right.
Well, and I think we need to look at the dimension or, the area of some of the parks that we currently have. So in my neighborhood, there's a small park. I think in a new development like Red Tail Ridge, if they were to put in a small park like that, it would be fine. I think they're building one that's bigger. So I would look at what an average park, not including, Lakeview. What's a typical playground containing park like in terms of area? I get the concern about maintaining a small park is, maintaining 5 small parks is more work than maintaining one big park.
But at the end of the day, it's about serving the residents.
Right.
And we pay the taxes.
Right,
to have
right.
it done.
Yes.
So if we need to.
And maybe
increase the
people can't
fees,
get
then-
to that big park,
Exactly.
I mean, and I agree, we have, I mean, Baskerville Park, I don't know if you know where that is,
Yeah.
on Century Avenue in Baskerville. It's the smallest park in the city, like, and you know, the amount of hours I spent at that little park, and we still live in that area, and how valuable it is to our neighborhood. I mean, yes, it's loud, it's right on Century Avenue, but you know, when the weather turns warm in March, kids didn't care. It's very nice to have, and it's actually, we, you know, made some improvements to it over the last couple of years too, which but I also do see the argument that we also need to have nice usable park space too. So
I think there's other means for when a new development happens. There's other ways the city can ensure that we get usable parkland that's dedicated. So I'm not too worried about lowering the minimums, lowering the minimum lot area.
The 3 acre minimum came from the city's comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, or CORP. And it was actually, the zoning district was created, was it about a year ago?
Yeah.
When we created that, so we just carried forward the same standard. So it did go to Parks Rec for their review. I don't remember if Commissioner Summers or Commissioner Adams, you probably were on the committee,
I
I
was.
think, when it happened. But I would also agree with what Mark said, that acceptance of parkland is at the purview of the Parks Rec Forestry Commission advising the Plan Commission. So if there's a recommendation not to accept parkland because it's not appropriate, then we wouldn't accept it.
That's reasonable. All right.
But what lot area do you favor then?
How big is Baskerville?
It's very small.
I'm not sure it's an acre. I
No, it's
I'm
not
sure
an
it's
acre.
under-
I'm gonna say it's tiny.
I mean, why don't we just remove the minimum? Because each infill or each new development is gonna be a different situation, right? If it's at the purview of the Parks and Rec Commission anyway.
Baskerville is 0.2 acres.
But we can still.
Point one.
That can still, well, but I mean, we can have a half an acre standard, for example, and Baskerville can still be zoned that. It's just not conforming. You know, We
Right.
just don't want to see future parks, or somebody wants to convert 2 lots into a park. 2 lots. are
But
probably
here's a
half an acre.
question. What if a developer wanted to do a redevelopment in an area of already highly developed Middleton? Let's say it's behind the co-op. I can't think of a good park there. If they wanted to tear down some houses and build a multi-family unit, and they purchased a lot in the neighborhood of somebody selling their house that wasn't attached to their property, could they tear it down and turn it into a city park? And
Or-
wouldn't that be valuable to that?
Or
community?
could they have that be as part of the park or recreational space serving their multifamily development, because we have that requirement now too. So I think it's highly unlikely that a developer, someone redeveloping a site puts in a park without city assistance. I mean, Abby can speak to that in terms of the project we have right now west of Parmenter. Without, that leverage. So.
It's kind of at the discretion of
Right.
the city, because if the city says we will accept the fees in lieu of land dedication, then usually right now, with the way that the fees are and the cost of land, if it's already in a highly developed area, it's going to be much more favorable to the developer to pay the fees in lieu than to dedicate land. But if it's in a growing part of the city in a new subdivision, then the balance is more favorable to go with land dedication.
Yeah. What does the city do with those fees?
So the fees in lieu of land dedication can be used to acquire new parkland or to prep sites for things like utilities that are required to serve new amenities within parks. For example, the city recently bought the Heisey property on North Parmenter using the park fees in lieu of land dedication. The park improvement fees must be to improve infrastructure within parks like playgrounds or basketball courts or things like that.
Okay, I'm gonna ask that we
Yeah.
finish this portion up because it's getting towards 9:30 and it's been a robust discussion.
So what is the advantage of putting in a half an acre as a minimum lot area as opposed to just not specifying?
I think we need to have some sort of a, and you're saying leaving the other standards in there, Commissioner Hutt and Ira? I don't know if we have anything where we don't have a minimum lot area.
I mean, in some cases, we say like per the building code, we could say per Parks and Recreation Commission, you know, acceptance of the land. That could be.
I think it's more likely that we would rezone a lot, that an existing lot instead of a new lot, but yeah, maybe we can do what Daphne said.
If you were gonna go that route, I think that I would mirror the language that's in the ordinance related to land dedication, which is actually that the Parks Board advises the Plan Commission, but the Plan Commission makes the determination.
I like that.
So just basically as determined by Plan Commission with, or we'll keep something short in there, but determined by, we'll come up with something.
And then
So then, sorry, was there something else in this section?
I was just going to jump to 144, but you're going through the list, so
144 is what?
the page. But keep
Oh,
going.
got it. So just very quickly, there was also committee request for additional research. I'm still, it's still something I'm working on. We don't have to go through that now unless there's something there jumps out at you. Let's just go to the map. So there's 4 items here now that I want to touch on. The first is already reflected in the map that's on, it's online, right? That one's. So we originally were thinking that these blocks of perimeter between the university and the roundabout would be mostly 2-family development, but we, upon further contemplation, are recommending that most of these lots be shown as mixed-use neighborhood, which also still allows single-family and 2-family dwellings. Making this change would enable existing buildings to provide a range of land uses that are better suited for a key transit corridor while helping connect downtown Middleton with redevelopment along Parmenter Street to the north. So to be aware that it was different from what was originally shown when we posted the map. Any objections to that? No. Item 2, 1620 Middleton Street, another example of a change we're making based on open house feedback. Somebody asked, why are we showing a single family, a 10-unit building that is, Daphne's pointing to it. I think, it's that lot. And my response to them was, good question. It's been that way for 40 years, but there's no reason why it should be zoned single family. So we are simply recommending that be zoned multifamily, low density. So I presume there's no objection to that. It doesn't quite, let's see, the lot measures 75 feet wide. Well, anyway, it's the closest fitting zoning district, in other words. So it's the best we can do.
Okay, keep going.
Item 3, we are proposing the city-owned lands west of Highway 12 that encompass the North Fork and South Fork, West Branch Creek in our zone PDD. We are proposing designating those as conservancy. So a lot of you would then see green, that among other lots. And then the last item is, we've already touched on it, is to restore to PDD the airport property. It would be PDD based on our earlier discussion. So that's all I have.
I have one more that I suggested in an email.
Oh, I'm
If you
sorry.
go- That's okay.
I had that on here too.
If you go over to Whittlesey Road.
Yep.
It's similar actually to this North Fork thing. So that path, that drainage basin, the path and the outlot north of it. Well, the other 2 are already showing as conservancy lands in our conservancy master plan, or the conservancy lands plan. So those 2 need to change.
Yep.
And then I suggested that outlot that's connected to the path also be zoned as conservancy.
And based on how the land, the nature of the land, it just, that is the best use by far, so. Yep, sorry, I forgot to.
That's okay.
So those are the changes that we will make to this draft zoning map this week, so that's what's available for public review.
Mark, can I
yeah.
bring up
Sure.
a couple of other just sites to discuss with the commission? One is the, I think it's called Stonefield Glen Shopping Center, and associated uses right now is mixed use avenue. I would suggest that it's probably more appropriate for that to be mixed use neighborhood rather than mixed use avenue. It is not really served the same way as University Avenue or Century or Allen Boulevard are with transit, and it's certainly surrounded by low density development. I think would be appropriate, but I'd like to get others' feedback. And I would like to consider the Allen Boulevard site that's been the matter of discussion as mixed use neighborhood as well, for kind of because of its surrounding uses.
I see the logic there.
I think we should discuss this next time. I will say I don't see the logic of that second suggestion. Just because if you look at that whole area, it's mostly, with the exception of Middleton Beach Road, it's mostly higher density units. So I think that is it's like bookending the conservancy lands there. And I think it's an appropriate designation to have that be avenue mixed use.
I'm okay with putting this up for discussion later. I just wanted to bring it up.
Any other map changes? Any other feedback? I don't need to go through the other feedback we've gotten from open houses. I've been summarizing it. These are themes we've gathered so far. There's probably a couple additional ones to add from yesterday's meeting. We had about 17 at primary yesterday.
Is that what you've been averaging?
We're averaging about 12 to 15.
Excellent.
We've had one that was over 20, the one that you attended, and yesterday was 17, and we've always had about 10 at
That's
least.
good.
Yeah.
It's healthy.
One more, Saturday, October 14th, 9:30.
Great.
And then the last question that we have for you is, we want your direction on scheduling public hearings. I think it'd be one public hearing on all the ordinances would be fine. They are all interrelated to each other. I outlined a few reasons why we are recommending November 14th. We have concerns about the holiday season, especially, and we have our goal of getting this done before the end of the year. Obviously, we want to do it right. But if we have the hearing on the 14th, we then avoid the Thanksgiving time. We also assume that we probably won't take action on the night of the hearing. There might be some issues that come up from the public that you'll want to address. And so we wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss this tonight.
And what about our changes to the ordinance or the map are allowable throughout the public hearing process? And
yeah, so that's one of the challenges we have, is that the next meeting of this body is until the 24th. The hearing notice, if we went with the 14th of November, would be published on October 19th. One of my concerns, I think a big concern would be, we can't keep having a moving target. Once we publish the ordinance, and what I was going to call it was the hearing draft of the ordinance. And so the goal is to have that posted on October 19th. As we all have noted at the staff level, it's very possible that we need to revise the ordinance based on the hearing input. I mean, that's the whole point of having a hearing, is to recognize that there still are changes to be made. So my thoughts on that are, and as we've done with what Abby has done with the comp plan, we have a hearing scheduled. And then if there's changes that arise before that hearing is held, we disclose those in the packet as here's some additional changes. Ideally, they're not substantive policy issues, that we want to have the public have full notice of what they're speaking about. But, we feel at the staff level that we have gotten the guidance we need to update the ordinance, have a second draft posted by the 19th. And yeah, there's a couple little outstanding things here that we weren't able to report on tonight. But I think we've flagged for you as we've gone along the policy issues as they've surfaced. And hopefully we have your confidence that we can resolve those issues that are, that you've discussed tonight. There isn't really anything outstanding that I think is of a huge nature, but that's up to you to decide.
And when would all these revisions go to council? Assuming we have a hearing
Well, if the
here.
hearing
on
were
the
held on the 14th, it'd be up to you to decide when you're prepared to make a recommendation to the council. Hopefully that could occur on November 28th, and then the council would have it at the first meeting in December, which is probably the 5th.
Mhm.
And there's nothing that prevents the plan commission from holding a second hearing if you get a lot of feedback from the first and you want to revise the draft. But we would not be obligated under state statute to have a class 2 notice for a second public hearing. And that always is like a month time frame to get it published in the newspaper. So that's kind of where we were hoping at least we could get the required class 2 notice public hearing done, to kind of keep us relatively on track to get it done by the end of the year. But if it doesn't happen, we hold a second hearing or, whatever the plan commission feels comfortable with at that point.
I have to say, if you're averaging 15 people per town hall that you've hosted, you've done a lot of diligence. That is still a very good turnout, and you've done multiple of them. I feel comfortable with that November 14th date, especially as you've said this whole time, things will always be evolving.
Madam
Years from
Chair,
now. Yes.
I'll make a motion that we set a public hearing for changes to zoning ordinance and map, sign ordinance and outdoor lighting ordinance on Tuesday, November 14th at 7 PM.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any
Who
discussion?
was the second?
Bruce?
Discussion is if we are gonna have quorum, I definitely will be traveling that day, so.
I'll be here. Hopefully healthier. Yes, by then. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.